But you've talked quite a bit about women in your family, and we've had a conversation about women's lives a bit and how critical they were. But you've also got some stories about men and young men and the challenges that faced them. Would you like to tell one of those stories?
Okay. This is a story about my dad and an uncle of mine. It takes place back in about 1919. My dad tells this story of when he and my uncle, as teenagers in 1918, were working for the Black Donald Mining Company in the Calabogie area of eastern Ontario. They were cutting mining timbers for the mine, and the day before Christmas they decided to go home for the holiday. Home was the Crutch Lake area near Charlotte Lake. That was 50 miles away. There was another man from this area who was working with my dad and uncle, and he was coming home for the holiday also. They could have taken the train, but that would have cost each of them $2, 2 days' wages at that time. Or they could walk. It was roughly 50 miles, and they calculated they could cover the distance in a day, and they would save a day's wages. So they set out on foot. They did not expect to get home until after dark, and they did not expect to be threatened by a cold, wintry southwest wind that blew into their faces the whole trip. Their route was to follow the railroad track to Clarendon Station from Calabogie, then travel the township road west to Crutch Lake. By the time they were 20 miles down the track, they had a greater understanding of the task that they had set for themselves. One thing that they didn't expect was that two of them would have a frozen spot on their cheeks. They were well dressed for working in the winter weather, but they didn't wear a scarf in the bush. They didn't even have a scarf in their possession, and so they could only shield their faces from the wind by holding a hand up in front of them. Another unexpected development was that my uncle was panicking. He was one of the two who had a frozen cheek, and fear took over. He began whining about how they were going to perish, and that they might as well give up, etc., etc. The other two were of sterner stuff and pushed on. My uncle dropped back farther and farther. My dad had no intention of abandoning him, but hoped that Miles would realize that there was only one thing to do, and that was keep going. This was my dad's first experience with that kind of fear and panic. He looked back and could not see his brother on the track. The two of them went back and found my uncle lying in the snow on the railroad embankment. He would not get up, nor would he listen to them. He told them to go on without him. They threatened him with physical abuse if he did not get on his feet and get moving. He wouldn't budge. Dad and the other man went down the track a bit and talked it over. They knew two things were obvious. One, they could not carry him all the way to Clarendon. And two, they were not going to leave him to perish. They went back to this gentle man and put the boots to him. When he could take the punishment no longer, he headed down the tracks, with the two men behind him who would tolerate no hesitation on his part. They made it out, obviously, but it was not a pleasant experience. 30 years later, this gentle uncle was working for the township, upgrading a section of the local roads. The work involved some rock drilling and dynamiting of the rocky knolls in the road. There were 3 men working on this job, and they all had a rudimentary knowledge of dynamite. At that time, most rural people could buy dynamite, and it could be purchased in any local hardware store. The newest method of dynamiting was to use a car battery to provide the electric charge, and two fine wires were laid out from the battery to the dynamite charge, a safe distance. The battery would be a safe distance away from where the charge, or the dynamite was. The man had placed the charge in one of the holes in the rock, hitched up the wires, strung the wires to the battery, and then threw the switch. The charge didn't go off. The theory is that with an electric current, if the dynamite doesn't fire, then it is safe to reset the wires in the dynamite and fire the battery switch again. Nobody knows what went awry that day, But what is known is that the three men went back to the dynamite charge and were bending over it, trying to ascertain why it had not fired. That's when the dynamite blew. My uncle's leg was blown off between the knee and the groin. When the first of the other two men came to, my uncle said to him that he thought they had killed the third man. He was still unconscious. Shortly afterwards, a local farmer happened by with a half-ton truck. He loaded the three of them in the truck, putting my uncle in the back. He drove them to Sharbert Lake, where the local doctor gave my uncle a needle and told him to drive and take him on to Perth. My uncle died somewhere between Sharbert Lake and Perth, in the back of a half-ton. He was a gentleman, a man who might have died along a bitterly cold railroad track one day before Christmas, but for the boots of those who would not abandon him. He was a man who risked his life to save a dollar, and a man who 30 years later lost his life trying to make a dollar. Why?
That's a sad story.
It is
Very
a sad
story. Yeah, and the dangers of working with dynamite. I mean, we see that all over the country in this country's history, right? Terrible accidents.
I almost had the same experience myself. When my brother was building his house, we had dug the foundation out, and there was a big stone there that we had to blast. So we got the dynamite and put it on the big rock, and packed some earth around it, and we were just using a fuse, not a battery. And we cut a good long fuse so that we could get well away from it before it blew. And my one brother went up the road, and I went down the road, and my oldest brother was going to light the fuse and blow it. So he lit the fuse and took off, got a safe distance away, and we waited and waited and waited. It didn't blow. We waited like a half an hour, and we knew about our uncle. We knew better, but it didn't blow. So after half an hour, a fuse is going to burn out. This is a fuse you light with a match. So we got this long pole, and we tied a bag around the end of it and poured some gasoline on it, and my brother crawled in on his stomach and nursed the burning bag in under the fuse to try to get the fuse relit. Put it in there, crawled back out, got away. We stood back for an hour and 20 minutes. That dynamite didn't blow. So we decided, okay, it's not going to blow. We turned to head towards the dynamite, and it blew.
Oh my goodness.
That close.
Wow.
So I better give us a story that has some humor to it now.
Well, I want to ask you a question though, and we can pick up some of this later too. But that story, you didn't experience that, so you had heard that story about your uncle and your
Yes.
father.
Yes.
So was that a family story that perhaps your father told you?
Somewhere in there, I got a whiff of that story, and I hit my dad up about it. And that's when I learned about it.
So you persuaded
Years
him?
later.
Yeah, right.
I was 40 or 50 years old when I learned that story.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So it those kinds of stories were not told as cautionary
No.
tales or
Well, we're country people, and we're private people, and
yes.
I'm the yappy one.
But can we talk a little bit about stories for a few minutes?
Sure.
So, tell me when you started writing stories, when you became put your histories into written words.
I was retired from teaching. I was 50 plus years old. In my 60s, even some of these I wrote in my 70s. They were later in life activities. Yeah.
So you weren't writing these stories down some of the early experiences.
these
You
are
didn't
all-
write that. You were writing these from memory.
Yes, yes.
Right, right. And did you go back to some of the people, some relatives, maybe your brothers?
Most of them were gone. Yes, most of them were gone.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't think of one that wasn't gone, actually.
And I asked you earlier, why did you start writing?
I don't know. I know in teachers in university, when I took, I guess it was my second or third English course, my prof, I was quite windy with my essays. Most students would write 5, 8, 10 pages. I would write 30. But I got good marks in my essays. I was getting A's and B's all the time. I went into them in depth. Because I'd done so much correspondence work with my university, I got writing was the way I earned 2/3 of my degree, was writing correspondence courses type of stuff.
And you were reading too, right? You
And of
told me
course, yes.
reading poetry and other things.
Yes, everything. And,
Yeah.
but anyway, where was I going with this?
Yeah. Why? So you retired from teaching.
Oh yeah, well the teacher, what I was going to say was this English professor said to me something one time, he said something to me about writing. I guess he saw something in my writing that caught his attention, I don't know, but he was suggesting that I take writing a little more seriously maybe. I don't remember exactly, but something like that.
And
then
that stuck with you.
Yes, and then I had all these stories in my memory. So I'll read you a lighter story now.
All right.
Okay.
Well, just give me a second and I'll reframe it a tiny bit.
Okay. Is it okay if am I on yet?
No?
Okay, is it okay if I say ass over tea kettle?
Sure.
Okay.
What story are you picking now?
It's not the one I'm doing now. Oh, 63, but ass.
63? Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Oh, yeah, okay.
All right, am I ready?
Yeah, we're ready to go.
Okay.
Do you want Belinda to have a look at this one before you?
No, just
It's
jump.
it's
If you
okay.
don't like it, we won't use it then.
Yeah, exactly. Jump right in, bud.
This is an amusing incident that happened in a small village where I lived in eastern Ontario. And I have entitled it, When You Were Small and Poor, You May Have to Try Harder. Back in the 1940s, in the small rural hamlet of Maberly, Ontario, the Saturday night dances were the highlight of social activities for the week, nay, for the season. Certainly for the young set, these dances could not be missed. Only absence from the area or sickness could be a cause for lack of attendance or inadequate funds. Not that the door charge was unreasonably high or anything like that. It was simply a fact of life that back then the 25 cents for admission might not be in the pocket, and if some means of obtaining admission price could not be found, then in desperation one might try to sneak into the dance without paying. Sneaking in was not that difficult as one might assume, simply because of the unique setup at the hall entrance. The main entrance to the dance floor was at the top of 3 steps, and immediately inside was the dancing portion of the building. Off to the extreme right of the door was a small window, at which one purchased your ticket, then climbed the 3 steps, and upon entering, gave up your ticket to the appropriate attendant responsible for this activity. More frequently than not, the person selling the ticket would also collect it. As it was a small community and the influx of customers for the night would rarely exceed perhaps 100 souls, and the arrival of these patrons was staggered over an hour or more, it was not difficult for one agent to do both jobs: sell the ticket through the window to the arrivals, then take a few steps sideways to the door and receive the ticket as they entered the dance floor. Not the best arrangement, perhaps, but it worked. almost all the time. Occasionally, someone might sneak in, as did a certain young Irish lad, a very slight Irish lad, of very limited financial resources. Soon he was enjoying himself on the dance floor and thinking that he was going to get away with his misdemeanor. Unfortunately for him, the ticket seller, who was a big man and not all that old, nor timid either, spotted him and beckoned him over to the window. "Did you buy a ticket?" he asked doubtfully. "No," our Irish lad answered. "Then out you go," growled the ticket man, and the youth disappeared out the door. Some time later, when the crowd had reached its peak for the night, the ticket man spotted the Irish lad back in the hall, dancing away happily. This time there was no question about had the boy bought a ticket or not. The interloper was seized by the arm and unceremoniously waltzed to the door and sent on his way. At midnight, a break in the dancing was taking place for refreshments and to give the band a rest. By then, too, the attendants usually quit their posts and joined the festivities, since rarely were there new arrivals after that late hour. Besides, if someone could not make it to the dance until so late, it was hardly fair to charge him full rate or even any rate. After all, generosity was not a total stranger to these people. Our Irish lad had hoped that this generosity might extend to him and he might get a bite to eat and partake of the dancing for the rest of the dance, which ended at 1 o'clock. It was not to be. He had squandered any compassionate feeling that might have existed for him when he twice sneaked his way into the dance hall and twice being evicted. The ticket seller turned bouncer spotted him halfway up the hall, sitting on a bench along the wall. During the break, the crowd was sitting on benches along the wall, standing out or near the back door, or standing outside near the door entrance. The bouncer strode the width of the hall, seized our luckless Irish lad by the collar with one hand, by the seat of the pants with the other hand, and started crow-hopping him towards the door. As he neared the door with his victim, he shouted to the smattering of people in his path. "Clear the way," he bellowed. At the door entrance, 3 steps above the ground outside, the bouncer gave a mighty heave, and with a spinning motion hurled the young man ass over tea kettle down the steps. "I told you to stay out," he shouted loudly, and with that he turned back into the hall. When our dauntless lad had stopped rolling over and over, he picked himself up, carefully brushed himself off, and turned to the few dozen people that had witnessed his humiliation. "I think he's tiring," he announced confidently.
That is very good. That's very funny, Bud.
Did you stop? Or are you still filming? Did you
I
stop?
can stop if you want me to.
I'll tell another one.
Well, I'd like to just ask you a couple of things about
Okay.
that.
Half a second on it.
Okay.
I'm going to adjust this a tiny bit. There. Okay, go ahead.
So, but did you witness that, or is that's fiction?
No, it's not fiction.
Oh, okay.
No.
So
It's a true story.
it's a true story.
Yes. But I was too young to be there.
I see. I see. And so, how did you hear that story?
I don't remember. There's quite a few of my stories. I can't remember the source. I never wrote them down. Well, you see, I heard the story, and it was years later I wrote them, so I would not have remembered.
Yeah. But you have an incredible memory for the details.
That's right.
I think I have a terrible memory, but I remembered these anyway, so that's what counted.
Do you did your writing change from when you started writing stories until more recently? Do you think there's been a change in?
No, it was a spare time activity, and I was retired and through with that heavy work period in my life, so I had lots of casual time.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And you've written 2 novels?
I've written 2 novels. I didn't publish them. I just wrote them for the experience. My daughter, one Christmas, she got a hold of the stories, and they weren't proofread, they were just the way I wrote them. She got a hold of the stories, and she took them and had them put in book form, and gave them to me for Christmas. So I have had the experience of holding a book in my hand with the title on it and my name as the
Yes.
author. I have the 2 books here.
Yes. And what are they about? Just
One was probably getting a load off my chest. It was about a young man who teaches school, who is athletic, who plays basketball, who coaches basketball, and a conflict with the principal throughout his teaching career. And it's, of course, it's a love story too, and a forbidden love, of course.
so, is it autobiographical? Is that
I'm going to say no.
okay? Okay. Yeah. And the other one,
The other story?
the other novel.
Oh,
Yeah.
the other novel?
Just
No, it's not biographical at all. It's pure fiction.
yeah, yeah. Well, you certainly have a way with language, and I mean, as we saw at the end of that last story, that's just really delightful. Yeah. So, share another story.
All
with us.
right, now this one is similar. It ends the same way, but it's not quite as.
Okay, let's stop, and I'm just gonna reframe, and you're gonna just say that again.
Oh, okay.
Which one is this, bud?
Page 66.
Just give me a second here.
This is short. Single page.
There we go. Okay, anytime.
This is a story I called You Gotta Do What You Gotta Do. Ted was a good man. Back then, being a good man meant more than just having a proclivity for moral excellence. It also meant being physically able to do those jobs in life which frequently one is called upon to perform. Ted had 2 grown daughters of marriageable age. As one might expect, there were frequent nights when suitors were guests at Ted's house. The girls would stand on Ted's front veranda, some 15 steps above the country road that barely cleared his front step, and welcome their respective dates into the main house after he had climbed to the main deck of the front porch. On one particular evening, both girls had a visitor. The oldest girl's beau was a strapping young man, quiet in his own way, but confident enough in himself that he wouldn't let anyone push him around. The younger of the girls had a beau who was brash, a tendency to talk when he should have been listening, or at least thinking about what was being said around him, if not talking. He was a healthy enough specimen manhood, but he still had to learn what his capacities were. On this particular night, the conversation spun a little bit out of control over some matter of no significance, to the extent that the younger suitor got too mouthy, and the father of the girls advised him to clean up his speech or get out. Unwisely, the young man voiced the opinion that there was no one there in the house that was man enough to put him out. At this point, the other young man felt that he had to interject or lose face. To himself and to his girlfriend, he turned to Ted and asked politely, "You or me?" Ted softly but firmly said, "Open the door." The unruly suitor went spinning ass over tea kettle down the front steps and out onto the road. End of the story.